The night on the alien city was always strange to the human traveler named Daniel. He had walked many worlds, seen many faces, but tonight something felt different. The streets were too quiet, the neon lamps flickered weak, and the smell of smoke and iron filled the air. Daniel followed a narrow alley, his boots echoing on the wet metal floor. Whispers came from the shadows, voices low and cruel. He pressed his hand on the wall, listening, and then he saw it. A gate, half-rusted, guarded by two tall aliens with silver eyes. They scanned every figure that passed, letting only some inside. Daniel pulled his hood lower and walked near. One guard sniffed at him, hissed in his own tongue, and let him in. The gate closed behind. And the world changed. It was a hidden market, buried under the city like a wound that refused to heal. Dim red lights burned from hanging lamps. Smoke covered the air. Cages stood side by side, metal bars glowing faintly from heat inside them. Young alien girls sat pressed against each other, their faces pale, their eyes wide. Some cried softly, others just stared at the floor. Broken, Daniel's chest grew tight. At first he thought it was another slave market. He had seen such places before, where the strong sold the weak. But then a voice roared through the hall. The auctioneer, fat and tall with yellow skin. He raised a hand and laughed. "Tonight we offer the finest meat in the galaxy, fresh and tender, ready for the feast." Daniel froze, his ears rang. He looked again at the cages. The girls were not slaves, they were food. Meat for alien tables, bodies for alien teeth. The crowd of buyers cheered, their claws clapping, their teeth flashing. Hungry eyes glowed in the dark. Staring at the trembling captives, Daniel's fists curled. Every instinct told him to walk away. This was not his fight, not his world, not his people. But his human heart refused. The thought of anyone cutting into those helpless girls, screaming for help, broke something inside him. He walked deeper into the market. Blending with the buyers, his hood hid his face. His steps slow, his eyes sharp. He passed a cage where a girl with silver hair clung to the bars. Her lips moved, whispering words he could not understand. But her eyes begged him not to leave her. Daniel nodded just once, a silent promise. The auctioneer shouted again, raising the bidding stick. "This one is special. Her flesh is soft, her blood pure, fit for the tables of kings." The crowd roared louder. One alien with golden armor lifted his claw. Naming a price, another doubled it. The numbers rose higher and higher. The girl inside the cage pressed herself back. Tears falling down her cheeks, Daniel's heart pounded. He moved closer, near the front rows. He saw guards with blasters standing on the edges. He saw knives, chains, hooks hanging from tables ready for cutting. It was not only a market, it was a slaughterhouse, a place where life was traded like fruit. His jaw clenched. Then the youngest girl was dragged out. She was no older than 15 by human years. Her legs shook as two guards pulled her forward. The crowd leaned closer, drooling. Daniel's breath caught in his chest. The auctioneer raised his voice. "Let the feast begin with her." Daniel's hand slid inside his coat. His fingers touched the small blade hidden there. He could not fight them all, not with bare steel against blasters, but he also could not walk away. Not now. Not when every eye was fixed on the terrified child. Her cry cut through the smoke, high and sharp. "Please!" she screamed, though most could not understand her tongue. Daniel did, not with words but with heart. He heard the plea clear as fire. The bidding rose, voices shouting numbers, laughter filling the air. The girl's knees buckled, the guards yanked her up, and Daniel took a step forward, his shadow falling across the crowd. His mind whispered, "This ends tonight." The auctioneer's voice echoed, "Sold." To the noble house of, but he never finished, because Daniel's voice cut across the hall, calm but burning. "I'll take her," he said. Every head turned, every claw froze, the room went silent. Daniel's hood slipped back just a little, enough for the nearest alien to see the shape of his face. A human, the only human in that hall. The crowd hissed, growled, muttered. The auctioneer blinked, confused, then smiled sharp. A human customer. Rare indeed, he licked his lips. "But tell me, human, do you buy for feast or for mercy?" Daniel's eyes locked on the trembling girl. His voice was low but firm. "I buy to save," gasps broke the silence. The buyers laughed, some angrily, some amused. The guards' claws reached for their blasters. And the girl's eyes widened with hope for the first time. Daniel felt the air tighten. He had just declared war inside the market of shadows, and there was no turning back now. The market went silent after Daniel's words. Every buyer turned to stare at him, claws twitching, jaws half open. A human was rare enough in these parts, but a human speaking against the trade was unthinkable. The auctioneer tilted his head, his yellow skin glowing in the red light. Save, he repeated with a cruel smile. This is no temple, human, this is a market. And mercy is not for sale. The crowd laughed. Sharp and cruel, but Daniel did not laugh. His eyes stayed on the girl, her shoulders shaking. Her lips pressed tight, he stepped closer. Calm but steady. Inside, his rage burned like fire. But outside, he kept his face still. A silent storm waiting for the right moment. The auctioneer slammed his stick on the ground. If you wish to play buyer, human, then pay the price. He raised his hand, naming an amount so high even the armored alien hissed in surprise. The crowd chuckled again, thinking the stranger would back away. But Daniel did not move. He placed a small pouch on the table. Not credits, not jewels, just dull silver coins from Earth. The hall roared with laughter. Human metal. Someone mocked, good for melting, not for meat. Another jeered. The auctioneer shook his head. You insult my trade, outsider. But Daniel's eyes stayed hard. I don't insult, he said slowly. I warn. The guards froze for a moment, unsure. There was something in his tone that carried more weight than his small frame. Something that made even seasoned killers hesitate. The auctioneer leaned forward, his grin wide. And what do you warn, human? Daniel's hand slid under his coat. His fingers brushed against the cold steel of his blade. I warn, he whispered, that if one more hand touches her, I'll cut it off. The laughter stopped. For a breath, silence filled the hall, then anger burst out, growls, shouts, curses in alien tongues. The guards raised their weapons, blasters glowing, but Daniel did not flinch. His rage had grown too heavy to hide. The silent storm inside him was ready to break. The girl with silver hair clung to the bars, her eyes wide, filled with something new. Hope? Her lips formed silent words, and though Daniel did not understand, he felt the meaning. Don't leave me. The auctioneer's smile broke into a snarl. Kill him, he hissed. The guards stepped forward, their boots shaking the ground. Daniel pulled his hood back, revealing his face fully at last. A human face, tired and scarred, but alive with fire. He raised his blade. A small thing compared to their blasters, but his eyes burned with something the crowd had never seen before. A fury no cage could hold. The first guard lunged. Daniel ducked low, the blade flashing, metal cut flesh. A roar followed. The guard's weapon clattered to the floor, his claw gone. The crowd gasped. The second guard swung heavy. Daniel twisted, slammed his elbow into the alien's throat. The blaster fired wild into the ceiling. Sparks falling down, chaos erupted, buyers screamed, some rushing for the doors, others shouting for blood. The auctioneer's voice rose above the storm. Stop him! Stop the human! But the guards hesitated. They had seen something unnatural. A human moving faster, striking harder than expected. Daniel's rage had made him more than a man. It had made him unstoppable. He grabbed the fallen blaster, aimed it at the auctioneer. The fat alien froze. Open the cages, Daniel growled. The auctioneer spat. You wouldn't dare. A shot cracked. Burning the floor inches from his feet, Daniel's voice rose, sharp and deadly. I said open the cages. For a moment no one moved. Then slowly, with shaking hands, the auctioneer signaled. A guard pressed the switch. The cages hissed, doors sliding open. The alien girls hesitated, afraid it was another trick. But Daniel stepped forward, lowering his weapon. You're free, he said, voice softer now. Run! The girls looked at each other, unsure. But the silver-haired one stepped out. Trembling, she reached for Daniel's arm, her fingers cold against his skin. Her eyes asked a question without words, why? And Daniel whispered back, because no one should be sold like meat. The hall shook with footsteps. More guards rushing in. The alarm wailed, red lights flashing. The freed girls screamed, scattering. Daniel raised the blaster, his jaw set. This was only the beginning. He had broken their market, broken their silence. And now the storm was awake, the auctioneer screamed. You'll die for this, human. Every world will know your name, every hunter will chase your blood. Daniel's lips curled in a grim smile. Good, he said. Let them come. And then the firefight began. Blaster bolts cut through smoke. Cages rattled, the ground burned hot. Daniel moved like a shadow, his rage guiding his aim. His blade flashing when the blaster failed. Alien bodies fell. The freed girls ran toward the tunnels. And above the chaos, one sound rose clear. The auctioneer's scream of fear. Daniel's silent rage had spoken at last, and the market of shadows would never forget it. Smoke filled the hall, red lights flashing again and again. The air was heavy with the smell of burning metal and blood. Daniel stood in the middle, blaster still hot in his hand. Around him lay the bodies of guards who had thought a human was easy prey. They were wrong. The market had turned into a battlefield, and the human had become its storm. But the fight was far from over. From the far end of the hall, new guards stormed in, their armor black. Their weapons glowing, they moved in tight formation. Not like the earlier fools, these were trained enforcers, hired to protect the market at any cost. The auctioneer's voice shrieked behind them, "Kill him! Kill the human! Do not let the meat escape." Daniel glanced at the alien girls still pressed against the walls, afraid to move. The cages were open, but fear held them tighter than any lock. He shouted, his voice cutting through the chaos, "Run! Now!" But only a few moved. The youngest clutched the bars. Her silver eyes locked on Daniel as if he was her only shield. She didn't run. She waited. Daniel cursed under his breath. He fired at the enforcers, the blast slamming into their shields. Sparks spraying, they didn't fall, they advanced step by step. The floor trembling under their boots, Daniel ducked behind a cage, fired again. But the shields absorbed the hit. He needed something stronger, something more than this stolen blaster. His eyes darted to the wall. There hung a rack of heavy chains, hooks, and cruel knives meant for slaughter. Daniel's jaw tightened. The tools meant to harm could also save. He grabbed the chains, wrapping one around his forearm. The cold iron bit into his skin. He pulled hard, snapping the rack loose, sparks raining down. The enforcers hesitated. For a moment they saw not a man, but something wilder, a beast of rage wrapped in chains. Daniel charged. The chain whipped forward. Catching the first guard's weapon, he yanked hard, ripping it free. The guard stumbled, and Daniel slammed his elbow into the alien's jaw. Dropping him flat, the second swung a blade. But Daniel's chain wrapped around his wrist. With a violent twist, bones cracked, the weapon fell. Daniel struck again, fast and brutal. The enforcers broke formation. The crowd scattered, some climbing over each other to escape. Others still laughed, thinking the human was only delaying his death. But Daniel didn't hear them. All he heard were the cries of the captives. All he felt was the weight of their terror pressing on his chest. This was not only a fight, this was a promise. The silver-haired girl crawled out of the cage. Trembling, she reached for another lock. Pulling it open with her small hands, her voice rose in her own tongue. Calling the others, they listened this time. One by one, they stepped out, still scared, but moving. Daniel covered them, his chain striking, his blade slashing. Every guard that came close fell to the ground. The auctioneer screeched, "You fool! You'll die for them! Do you think you can save them all?" Daniel turned, his face dark with sweat and fury. "I don't think," he growled. "I know." He grabbed the keys from a fallen guard, tossing them to the silver-haired girl. "Open the rest," he shouted. Her small hand shook, but she obeyed. Locks clicked, cages swung wide. Dozens of eyes blinked in shock as freedom touched them for the first time. But then, a heavy alarm roared through the market. Deeper than before, metal shutters slammed down over the doors. Trapping them inside, the ceiling lights shifted from red to white, and a voice echoed from the speakers, calm and cruel. "You should not have done that. Human." From the far end, a giant figure stepped out, clad in dark armor, taller than any guard, his eyes burning like coals. He carried a hammer that sparked with blue lightning. The crowd gasped and shrank back. The silver-haired girl froze, her lips whispering one word, "Hunter." The hunter's steps echoed like thunder. He looked at Daniel with no fear, only hunger. "Human flesh," he said slowly. "I've never tasted it before." Daniel raised his chin, gripping the chain tighter. "I'm not meat," he answered. The hunter's grin widened. "Then prove it." The freed girls huddled behind Daniel, their small bodies trembling. He felt their fear, their trust, their hope, and his rage deepened, not for himself but for them. The chains rattled as he lifted his arm. The blade gleamed in the smoke. The hunter raised his hammer, lightning sparking across the hall. The market of shadows shook with the promise of a battle that would decide life or death. And Daniel knew this was only the beginning of breaking the chains. The hunter's hammer struck the floor. Blue lightning exploded outward, shaking the cages and sending sparks into the air. The freed girls screamed and pressed behind Daniel. The shockwave rattled his bones, but he stood firm. chain wrapped tight around his arm, blade gripped hard in his hand. The hunter's eyes glowed like coals, his voice deep and cruel. "You will not leave this place alive, human." Daniel's chest rose and fell with heavy breaths. He knew he could not match the brute's strength, but strength wasn't everything. Humans had something else, speed, cunning, and a fire that could not be caged. He shifted his stance, eyes narrowing. "I've walked through fire before," he said quietly. "And I'll walk through you," the hunter roared. Swinging the hammer high, the floor cracked as it came down. Daniel rolled aside, chain snapping forward, wrapping around the hammer's shaft. The hunter jerked it back with monstrous force. Daniel was lifted from his feet, slammed against the ground, pain shot through his ribs. But he refused to let go. With a sharp twist, he forced the hammer sideways. The hunter stumbled. Just for a second, it was enough. Daniel slashed with his blade. Cutting deep into the hunter's leg, the giant howled. Sparks flying from his armor, the crowd, those who had not escaped yet, shrieked and climbed over each other. The market was turning into chaos. Guards fired wild. Smoke filled the air. Alarms blared. The freed girls scattered toward the side tunnels. But the silver-haired one stayed close, her small hand clutching Daniel's coat, refusing to leave him go. He shouted, but she shook her head, eyes burning with stubborn fire. Daniel cursed under his breath. Turning back to the hunter, the giant swung again, sparks raining as metal clashed with chain. The hammer hit a cage, shattering it apart. Flames bursting as power lines snapped. Fire spread quickly, licking the walls. The market was now a burning pit. Daniel's mind raced. If they stayed, they'd all die. The only way out was through the tunnels, but the hunter blocked the path. Behind him, alien guards regrouped, blasters aiming for the children. Daniel's fury surged. He had no choice. He had to make them chase him, not the girls. He met the silver-haired girl's eyes. Her lips trembled as if to ask why. He pushed her gently toward the others. "Lead them out," he said, her eyes widened. But something in his voice left no room for argument. She nodded slowly. Then she ran, calling the others with her. One by one, the freed girls followed, their small figures disappearing into the smoke-filled tunnels. Daniel turned back to the hunter. Alone now, his chain rattled, his blade gleamed. The hunter growled, "Foolish human. You cannot win." Daniel spat blood. Smiling grim, "I don't need to win," he said. "I just need to buy them time." The hunter charged, hammer raised. Daniel dodged, sparks flying as the hammer crushed the floor where he had stood. He lashed out with the chain, wrapping it around the hunter's arm. The giant yanked him forward. Daniel's body slammed into armor like stone. The air rushed from his lungs. Still he stabbed his blade into the hunter's shoulder. The alien roared, slamming him back into a burning wall. Pain burned through Daniel's chest, but his eyes never broke. Fire spread higher, the ceiling groaning under the heat. Smoke choked the air. The market was collapsing. The hunter raised his hammer for the final blow, but a sudden sound cut through. The cries of guards from the tunnel side. The freed girls had fought back, throwing chains and broken metal at the guards. The silver-haired girl stood at the front, eyes glowing with defiance. They were not waiting to die anymore. They were fighting to live. Daniel's heart surged with pride. Even in the darkest pit, the spark of freedom could burn. He gritted his teeth, yanking the chain hard, pulling the hunter off balance. The hammer struck sideways, smashing into a fuel barrel. Blue fire burst out, flames roaring. The explosion threw both Daniel and the hunter across the hall. Metal crashed, beams fell, cages shattered. The hunter roared in fury. Daniel coughed, blood on his lips. But he forced himself up. He staggered toward the tunnels. Flames at his back. The girls screamed for him. Reaching out, he stumbled into the smoke. The silver-haired girl grabbing his arm. "Come!" she cried in her own tongue. He didn't need translation. He nodded, forcing his legs to move. Behind them, the hunter roared again, still alive, still coming. But the market burned hotter, walls collapsing, and Daniel led them forward. Through blood, through fire, toward a chance at freedom. The market of shadows was no more. It was now a tomb of flames. And the human who had broken its chains was carrying its survivors into the unknown. But deep in the smoke, the hunter's voice echoed. "This is not over, human." The tunnels spat them out into the open night. The burning market still roared behind, flames climbing high into the sky. Daniel coughed hard, smoke tearing at his lungs, but he didn't stop moving. The alien girls stumbled after him, their thin bodies shaking from fear and exhaustion. The silver-haired one clung to his coat. refusing to let go. They were free, but freedom was fragile. Above them, the desert stretched endless. Two suns glowed low on the horizon, painting the sky with blood-red light. The ground cracked with heat, winds carrying sand sharp as knives. Daniel squinted at the wastes ahead. No cover, no water, no food, but it was better than the cages. He tightened his grip on the blaster he had stolen. "We move," he said, voice firm. The girls nodded, too afraid to speak for a while. Only their footsteps filled the silence. Sand crunched under their feet. The wind howled like a beast. Daniel's mind raced. The hunter was still alive, he knew it. That monster wouldn't die so easily, and if the hunter survived, the whole market would send trackers after them. They weren't running from a prison. They were running from an empire of cruelty. Hours passed, their shadows stretching long across the desert. The youngest stumbled, falling to her knees. Daniel quickly lifted her in his arms, carrying her without slowing his pace. Her eyes closed, whispering weak words in her language. He didn't understand, but he could feel the meaning. "Don't let me go," he held her tighter. His jaw set. "I won't," he muttered. The silver-haired girl walked beside him. She kept glancing at him, as if trying to understand what kind of creature this human was. Finally, she spoke in broken words of his tongue. "Why, help us?" Daniel looked at her, his face shadowed. "Because no one helped me when I needed it," he said quietly. She didn't answer, but her eyes softened. A bond had started to grow, but peace didn't last long. The desert wind shifted, carrying a low hum. Daniel froze, tilting his head. The sound grew louder. Engines. His heart sank. Alien gunships, sweeping the desert like vultures. "Down," he hissed. They crouched behind a broken ridge, hearts pounding. Above, black shapes cut across the sky, searchlights stabbing the sand. Voices echoed through loudspeakers. "Run, little prey. The hunter wants you alive." Daniel's grip tightened on the blaster. He knew they couldn't fight ships not out here in the open. They had to move fast, keep ahead. The lights passed close, burning bright over their heads. One of the girls whimpered. Daniel put a hand on her shoulder, whispering, "Quiet. Breathe slow. Don't move." The ship hovered, scanning the ridge. Then, after a tense minute, it roared away. The girls sighed in relief, but Daniel shook his head. "They'll circle back. We keep moving." They rose, running again, their steps weak but determined. The desert stretched on, endless and merciless. But Daniel pushed them forward, his voice steady. One step, then another. That's how we live. By dawn, the suns burned high. The heat was unbearable. The girls' lips cracked, their feet blistered. Daniel tore strips from his own coat. Wrapping their feet, he searched for water. Scanning the horizon finally, he spotted dark stone rising ahead. Canyons, hope sparked in his chest. "Shelter," he said, pointing. They staggered toward it. Strength nearly gone, but hope was short. Behind them, a new sound grew. Engines again, closer, louder. Daniel turned. His blood running cold, a gunship descended. Sand whipping into a storm, its shadow fell over them, huge and dark. The girls screamed. Covering their faces, Daniel raised the blaster. But he knew it was useless against a war machine. The ship's hatch opened, and armored figures stepped out, weapons aimed. The hunter's voice boomed from inside the ship. "Run, human. Run as far as you like. The desert belongs to me." Daniel's eyes narrowed. The hunter had survived, and now he was hunting them across the wastes. The silver-haired girl grabbed Daniel's arm, her voice trembling. "What do we do?" Daniel looked at the canyon ahead, then back at the ship. He clenched his jaw. "We make our stand where the ground favors us." He pulled the girls forward, forcing them to run. The gunship followed overhead, weapons charging, but Daniel didn't stop. If they reached the canyon, they might have a chance. If not, the desert would be their grave. The suns burned hotter, the engines roared louder. The chase across the wastes had begun, and Daniel knew there was no turning back now. The desert sun blazed high. Burning every inch of skin, Daniel pushed forward, his boots dragging through the sand. The alien girls stumbled behind him, their eyes heavy with exhaustion, but ahead, the dark canyon walls rose like a fortress, tall cliffs of stone, sharp edges casting deep shadows. Daniel's heart pounded. "This is where we fight," he whispered to himself. Behind them, the gunship's roar grew louder. The hunter's voice echoed across the wastes. "You cannot hide, human. The desert belongs to me." Daniel glanced back. The black ship hovered close, dust storms spinning in its wake. Armored soldiers jumped down, weapons gleaming in the sunlight. The girls cried out, clinging to each other. But Daniel raised his hand, steady and firm. Don't stop. Into the canyon. They ran, stumbling over rocks. The canyon swallowed them in its shadows. Cool air wrapping around their tired bodies, but the sound of boots followed. Metal against stone, the enemy was close. Daniel's mind raced. The canyon was narrow, twisting, perfect for an ambush. He had one chance to turn the hunt into a trap. He turned to the silver-haired girl. Her chest rose and fell with sharp breaths, her eyes wide but steady. "Can you lead the others deeper?" he asked. She nodded quickly, though fear shone in her face. Daniel placed his hand on her shoulder. "Keep them alive, no matter what happens to me." Her lips trembled, but she whispered, "Yes." Then she guided the younger ones down a narrow path. Disappearing into the stone maze, Daniel stayed behind. He pressed his back against the canyon wall, the chain still wrapped around his arm, the stolen blaster in his other hand. His chest ached, his ribs bruised, but his spirit burned stronger than ever. He was one man against an army, but he was a human, and that meant something. The first soldier appeared around the bend. Daniel fired, the blast striking his chest, sending him sprawling. Another came snarling. Daniel swung the chain, wrapping it around the alien's neck. Yanking hard, the soldier choked, his weapon falling. Daniel slammed him into the wall, the stone cracking. The others hesitated, surprised by the ferocity of one human. But hesitation didn't last. The hunter himself stepped into the canyon, towering above them all. His armor cracked and scorched from the fire back at the market, but his eyes still burned with cruel hunger. He raised the lightning hammer high. "This time, human, there is no fire to save you." Daniel gritted his teeth. His voice echoed against the stone walls. "No, there is only me." The fight exploded. Plaster fire lit the canyon, sparks bouncing off stone. Daniel dodged between rocks, his chain striking like a whip. He knocked weapons from alien hands, slammed them into the cliffs. Every move was fueled by rage, every strike by the memory of cages and frightened eyes. But for every guard that fell, two more replaced him. The canyon echoed with screams, dust, and blood. Then came the hammer. The hunter swung with monstrous force. The ground cracked, rocks shattered. Daniel barely rolled aside, the blast of lightning scorching his arm. Pain shot through his body, but he pushed it down. He rose, chain whirling, blade flashing. The hunter laughed, the sound deep and cruel. "You fight well, human, but you will still die." Daniel spat blood, glaring up at him. "Maybe," he said, "but not before I take you with me." The silver-haired girl appeared suddenly at the edge of the canyon path. Her eyes widened at the sight of Daniel standing alone against the hunter. She shouted something in her tongue, her voice trembling with fear. But Daniel shook his head sharply. "Stay back!" He barked. She froze, tears filling her eyes. She wanted to run to him, but she knew if she did, they would all die. The hunter roared, swinging again. Daniel raised the chain, wrapping it around the hammer mid-swing. The force nearly tore his arm out of its socket, but he held, his muscles burning. With a scream, he pulled the weapon sideways. The hammer struck the canyon wall instead, stone collapsing in a shower of dust. The path behind the hunter crumbled, sealing part of the canyon. The alien soldiers stumbled, cut off from their leader. Daniel seized the chance. He charged forward, blade raised. The hunter swung his fist, but Daniel ducked low with all his strength. He drove the blade deep into the alien's side. The hunter roared in fury, slamming his elbow into Daniel's chest. The human flew back, crashing into the rock, vision blurring. But the hunter staggered, clutching his wound. Blood, dark and thick, poured down his armor. Daniel coughed, forcing himself to stand again. His body screamed in pain, but his spirit refused to break. He met the hunter's burning eyes. "This ends here," he growled. The canyon walls trembled from the weight of their battle. The freed girls huddled deeper inside, watching with wide, terrified eyes. They knew their fate depended on one human's stand, and Daniel knew too he wasn't just fighting for himself anymore. He was fighting for them all. The hunter lifted his hammer once more. Daniel raised his chain and blade. Two forces, one of rage and one of cruelty, clashed in the heart of the canyon, and the outcome would decide whether the children lived or died. The canyon shook with every strike. The hunter's hammer crackled with blue lightning. Daniel's chain whipped through the air, his blade flashing in the smoke. Stone cracked, sparks flew, Dust rained down. The freed alien girls clung to each other in the shadows, their eyes wide. They knew their lives depended on the lone human who refused to kneel. The hunter swung with brutal force. Daniel rolled aside, his ribs screaming in pain. The hammer struck the wall, sending rocks crashing down. Daniel's breath came ragged, his vision blurred, but his grip never loosened on the chain. This wasn't just survival anymore. It was a promise to never let them be meet again. The hunter sneered, towering above him. "You are strong for a human," he growled, "but you are still only flesh. I will break you and feed your bones to the sand." Daniel spat blood, his jaw set. "You'll choke before you taste me." With a roar, he lashed the chain around the hunter's arm, pulling hard. The giant stumbled. His hammer swinging wide, Daniel surged forward, stabbing his blade deep into the wound from before. The hunter bellowed, lightning sparking across his armor. The shock burned Daniel's skin, but he refused to let go. He pushed deeper, twisting the blade. The canyon echoed with the sound of the alien's scream, but the hunter didn't fall. He swung his massive fist, smashing into Daniel's chest. The human flew back, crashing hard into the rocks. Pain exploded through him, his lungs screaming for air. The silver-haired girl cried out, trying to rush forward, but the others held her back. Tears streamed down her face. She couldn't lose him, not after everything. Daniel staggered to his knees, blood dripping down his face. Every bone in his body felt broken, but he lifted his head, his eyes burning with fire. Humans didn't quit. Not when others depended on them, not when freedom was on the line. He stood swaying but unbroken. The hunter laughed darkly. "You don't know when to die." Daniel wiped blood from his mouth. "That's the thing about us," he rasped. "We don't die easy," the hunter charged. Hammer raised. Daniel braced himself, then at the last second darted aside. The hammer slammed into the ground, splitting the canyon floor. Dust and stone erupted into the air. Daniel wrapped the chain around the hammer's head, anchoring it into the cracked stone. The hunter tried to lift it, but the weapon was stuck deep in the fissure. His eyes widened in fury. Daniel didn't wait. He leapt forward, blade flashing, and drove it straight into the alien's chest. The hunter roared, stumbling back, his hammer still trapped. His blood pouring, Daniel pressed harder, pushing the blade until the giant fell to one knee. The canyon walls shook with his fall. The freed girls gasped, their hope rising like fire. The monster was finally falling, but victory had a cost. The hunter, with his last strength, swung his arm wide. The blow hit Daniel full in the side, bones cracked, pain blazed. The human collapsed to the ground, his blade still buried in the alien's chest. The hunter choked, his massive body trembling. Then at last he toppled. Crashing to the canyon floor, dead silence followed, broken only by the crackle of settling stone. The freed girls stared, their eyes filled with disbelief. The silver-haired girl ran to Daniel, dropping to her knees. "Wake, please," she begged in her broken voice. Daniel's eyes fluttered open, weak but alive. He managed a faint smile. "Told you, I wouldn't let them have you." Tears fell down her face, but she smiled through them. The others gathered around, their small hands touching Daniel's arms. His shoulders, they weren't meat anymore. They weren't prisoners, they were survivors because one human had chosen to fight. Soon more voices echoed at the canyon's edge. Armored figures approached, alien authorities drawn by the smoke and fire. They froze when they saw the scene. The hunter dead, the human bleeding, the children standing free. One officer hissed, "You broke their law, human. You will be punished." But before Daniel could answer, the silver-haired girl stepped forward. She spread her arms wide, standing in front of him. Her voice rang clear and fierce. "No, he saved us. If you take him, you take us too." The others cried out, following her. They formed a shield around Daniel, dozens of small, fragile bodies standing like stone. The authorities hesitated, stunned by their defiance. Daniel, weak but smiling, whispered, "They finally found their voices." He closed his eyes, exhaustion pulling him down, but inside he knew he had kept his promise. He had paid the price of freedom, and it was worth everything. Above the canyon, the sun set. Light spilling across the desert like gold, the hunter's shadow was gone. But the legend of the human who stood against a market of cruelty had just begun. And somewhere in the silence, the universe itself seemed to whisper, "Humanity does not bow,